Hi there, welcome to the More Sibyl podcast. This is a podcast for Blacks, Asians, and those who love them. I am Mo, and I am your host, ready to spark your curiosity as I take you on this adventurous ride of exploring cultures through the stories of my guests from all over the world. On this show, we get really personal, discussing salient issues that are relevant to our contemporary age and also building community around them. As our guests exercise courage and vulnerability in sharing their life's experiences, we hope that in turn you are inspired by them and that you get the courage needed to set your own stories free. Enjoy the ride, and thank you so much for listening. Okay. Well, welcome back, guys, to the podcast. This is Mo. Today's topic is super important and has a lot of relevance, not just for the individuals that we're going to talk about involved in it, but also I think as a way to educate people like me and for those that are listening about just, how sometimes we need to be very careful what we listen to on the media because so many stories are not being told. So we hope that in this next 40 whatever minutes we spend together on this podcast today, we're able to leave something with the listeners. Above all, for you to have this country in your hearts and prayers because they will really need that, pending when things, change for a little bit. So after 23 years of war, the Taliban has seemed to have swept to victory in Afghanistan. Afghanistan is a Central Asian country that is predominantly Muslim population, and for many years, women have become the pillars of the Afghan society. The Taliban, however, took over power and took away the rights of these women. Today, I'll be having a conversation with Arzo, who's an Afghan American in the US. I'll also be talking about the country and what the initiative her organization is doing to really help those that have been rescued so far. Arzo is not new to the podcast. I also follow her on Facebook. She's amazing. She does a lot of work with sex trafficking and foster care. And so, Arzo, welcome to the podcast. And she's also the CEO and founder of Sexy Buzz Babe. Hello, Arzo.
Hi, Mo. Thank you again for having me here today. And thank you so much for sharing your platform to have this conversation so that we can educate people so people can really become aware of what's going on.
My pleasure. Let's just start with the first question. How are you doing today? I mean, I've been following you. I've been following you for a while now, but recently your feed keeps coming up because I keep going to your page to kind of catch up, and you've been posting a lot. I imagine it's so overwhelming because sometimes I read it and it stays with me and I pray, of course. But how are you doing in the light of what's happening in your home country, Afghanistan?
Thank you. Today, it's a Saturday. Today's an okay day, but it's been tough. It's been really, really hard. And as the news keeps coming in and we find out what's going on, it's traumatizing for the community. It's traumatizing, obviously, for what people are going through back in Afghanistan, but even for people in the diaspora that are trying to help or raise awareness or whatever that everybody's doing. It's heartbreaking. It hurts. It hurts because we don't have control. And to see your countrymen, it hurts.
I'm a Nigerian here in the US. I've lived here for 10 years. But sometimes when I hear things about my country, I feel that survivor's guilt, and it stays with me for a while. And also when you last year we had a massacre really happen in Lekki, which is a suburb part of my country in Lagos, and it stays with you because you don't know what's going on. So you sometimes want to overcompensate and you're thinking, what should I do? Then you think you're just this individual. There's only so much you can do. Fine, you bring somebody on the podcast to talk about it, but it's so overwhelming because the problem is so much. What was why I was asking about how you were doing. Again, if we're speaking about the media, a lot of what I know about Afghanistan before meeting someone like you, I think you're like the second Afghani I've ever met in my life. The first one was someone in grad school and he was a very nice person, but we didn't have a lot of conversations like you and I are having right now. What I know about your country really hasn't been very good, and it's what's been shown in the media. I think about Afghanistan. It's not on my bucket list of places to go before even talking to you. But I just wonder, why do you think, a lot of what we know about countries like yours is so contrived? And why do you think the media just goes on having to tell that danger of that single story?
I mean, I think it's without to say this carefully, it's unfortunately the media, they have their narratives and they have to follow narratives that are given to them. And that's just, I think in the last couple of years, that's become apparent to everybody. And especially with what's going on in Afghanistan now, as somebody that posts a lot about what's going on the ground, directly through sources from Afghanistan, that stuff's not being covered in the news. Why? If there's journalistic integrity, why is that not being covered? So there's certain narratives, I believe, that have to be upheld, and so they're not covering everything. I think that the way that the media is today is very different than the media was in the 1980s. So this is something that people just need to be aware of. There are changes that need to happen, and I know there are groups of journalists that have kind of come together to dispel some of these things and lift the hood on these things. There's a lot of these types of things going on in our world right now at all different levels. It's not just the media. So there are things that we, I think, a society want to make it seem this is what Afghanistan is, or this is what's going on, or Afghans didn't pick up arms to protect themselves, or the soldiers, or this or that. But nobody's talking about the real reasons why America was in Afghanistan for the last 20 years. Nobody's talking about why Afghanistan is a place that people want to go to. Why is that not being covered? It's one of the most important pieces of information in the world. So, maybe we can talk about some of that stuff today.
We should definitely do that. So let's even take it back to your country a little bit. There are over, I think, up to 40 million in your country. I want to think about Afghanistan as a whole. Like, from what I've read about it, it's definitely a beautiful place. And I think what most people don't know about it, that it's very multi-ethnic and it's mostly tribal. You have a lot of, population that has like different, ethno-linguistic groups, like the Pashtun, Turkmen, the Baloch, the Pashai, Uzbek, Hazara, just to name a few. And I look at the pictures, the beautiful mountains, the history. But even reading the history of your country and even what is it right now, the very fabric of the culture of Afghanistan, Afghani people have been torn by war and, a lot of just, bad stuff going on, bad governance as a whole. So maybe just paint a picture a little bit. What was the Afghanistan like for you growing up? And maybe even talk a little bit about your family growing up before you left the place and what made you guys leave? Because I know that story, but I think a lot of our listeners don't know.
Thank you. So I was born in Kabul, Afghanistan. I live in America. I've grown up here since I was 2 years old. So America's all that I know. But I was born in Kabul, Afghanistan. And I'll tell you a little bit about our family and just kind of the structure of Afghanistan. So when I was born, Afghanistan was still a monarchy. So today there's some form of a democracy, but that wasn't the case back then. And prior to that, Afghanistan has been a monarchy for
thousands of years.
Yeah, and it's a tribal country, so there's a lot of tribes. There's 34 provinces in Afghanistan. Each one of those provinces might have like 1,000 villages or districts. And so, and just like Mo, you were saying that it's multi-ethnic and multicultural, it is. There's an Afghan culture and there's an Afghan pride amongst everybody, but all the different areas, they have their own subcultures, their own forms of dress, their own forms of just different things, even dialects and languages. And so that was kind of Afghanistan as a whole. And my great uncle was the prime minister of Afghanistan, like in the 60s. And I think we talked about this before. He used to come to America and take meetings at the White House with JFK and Lyndon B. Johnson and whatnot. And during like the 60s and like the 70s, they were really trying to democratize Afghanistan and move a little bit more towards westernization. Women started going to college and university and becoming nurses and doctors and people as a part of society. The Zahir Shah, who was the king during that time, he and his wife, the wife, I believe, she took off her hair covering. And so this was like a first step towards women empowerment and towards that lifting the veil of oppression against women in Afghanistan. And women took to it, very much so, particularly in the Kabul region. But we had so many members of our family held positions in the government. There were governors, senators. And so our family was part of the ruling class in that regard. And so when in the late 70s, there started to become a rise of a communist group that in Afghanistan, they were called the Pachamis. And so they were Afghans that were idealizing communist values and working with the USSR. And at the time, the USSR was a world power. And so they were taking over different countries. And so these Pachamis were working with other communists within the USSR, and they essentially started a coup. And so they did a coup. They overthrew the government. We were all in danger of being killed. The king went into exile. So a lot of things happened, a lot of disharmony, and most of the people that were part of the ruling class, if they were not killed, they fled the country for safety, because literally these communists were coming into people's homes with guns and gunning people down. There's people today that if we go to a party or a wedding, there's this older woman that my mom will point out to me and say that she was in the royal palace when they came in and they gunned down her whole family, and she held her children's lifeless bodies in her hands. So those are things that had happened. And so we escaped in 1980. I was born in 1980. We escaped, went through we were on donkeys, and my parents were carrying me in a blanket between these donkeys. And we went to a village that were taking in, a few of us that were coming in to hide us. We stayed in underground bunkers. There was a Afghan army truck that we were waiting for to pick us up, and they came, and the whole truck was filled with bodies of dead soldiers. And we got into this truck, and they took us to the next destination until we get to Pakistan. And then from there, Germany, they were taking refugees. And finally, we came to America as political asylum refugees.
Wow, what a story, Arzo. It's just incredible. I imagine that even the idea you have of what that place looked like has really changed a lot, because you haven't been there, I imagine, since you escaped many years ago as a child, correct?
Correct.
Yeah. Do you still have family? Any remote family members left in the country?
So during that time, most of the family left, thankfully. Since then, there were periods of peace in Afghanistan. So some family members went back to reclaim land, to build businesses, or, do things with real estate and whatnot. So we do have some people that have gone back. I have an uncle that lives there. He left sometime, I think, in the 90s, and he was remarried and has a child there. So he's there. So we do have some family. We've checked in with our family members. Thankfully, they're safe. They're in provinces that are away from Kabul. So they seem to be safe, thankfully, for now.
This next bit, I'm going to try to run through the history of your country. And a lot of what I know is from watching YouTube videos and, of course, reading some history books. But again, if there's any holes that needs to be poked in this, let me know. Because I feel like setting this template down will help further the next set of discussions we're going to be having. Especially about, the resistance and, of course, the Taliban as well. So from what I know about your country, it was, it's always been tribal. Yeah. But then they've had also a lot of influences. There used to be hippie trail way back in the 70s, and women, they were as free as they could be, and they could, go work and take up positions. And then you also talked about the monarchy system, and I think that was the last king I heard about was Zahir Shah, and he was, I think, touted as one of the very best things that happened to Afghanistan. At a point, he even made the office of the monarchy really very titular. They didn't want to have any form of power over the people, so it was more of a decorative role. And then I think his cousin, what was his name? I forget. Dawood. Is it Dawood or? Yeah, Dawood Khan, yes. Yeah, his cousin, plotted a coup against him. And before you knew it, they also sent a lot of scholars and a lot of the military men to the USSR to go learn about war tactics. But the downside of that was that it came back with the, Marxism and Leninism policies that was kind of seeping in a very organic and insidious way into, the very, I guess, what it meant to be Afghani. And of course, Kabul has always been that center where, if Kabul, sneezes, everybody catches a cold. But then you have the other rural areas, which, they were kind of slow to adopt a lot of these practices. But by 1970, Afghanistan was a booming Western middle class that, that had a lot of things going for it. And then, Daud Khan enacted that coup, established himself as the president. And in 1978, he was killed by the Soviet, military. They invaded Afghanistan and they propped up a pro-Soviet government. And in 1980, a million Afghanistan civilians, they defected to Pakistan because of the, contiguous nature of the country. Pakistan and Afghanistan, share a border. Afghanistan is actually a very landlocked country, so they have a lot of countries, that borders around it. Now, in 1986, the U.S., which is what they usually do when there's always like a power vacuum to be filled, they start supplying resistance with, ammunitions, anti-craft, missiles to fight the spread of communism, which was, heavily influenced by the Soviet Union. But we know that in the 1990s, the Soviet Union, fell as it were, and the civil war followed by Taliban rule. And then sometime in 1992, I think there was withdrawal of Soviet forces, and that, also led to the crumbling of the Najibullah pro-communist government. And the Taliban, I think, came out of that, which is kind of the saddest thing, because when we usually go to the extreme of things, the almost like that Newton, law of action, there's always that equal and opposite reaction that comes to take that place. And Taliban, to me, seems like an ultra-conservative, Afghan student warriors. And they emerged from the Mujahideen groups, which were those that were sponsored by the US and Saudi Arabia then to, fight against Soviet Union rule. And they took over the southern city in Afghanistan, which is the Kandahar, and they promised to restore order and bring greater security. But then they also brought with them the harsh interpretation of Islam on the territory they controlled. I also think Africa played a role in that, because a lot of the Egyptian scholars, they came as well to, they brought their own brand of Islam into the country. And in 1996, you had the Taliban taking over Kabul. They captured the former president and they killed him and they hanged his body from a lamppost. And from the 1990s up until then, you've had a lot of, countries trying to, gain control of the Taliban. You've had Pakistan, imposing their own influences, Saudi Arabia, of course, and the United Arab Emirates. Now, 2001, the US came and they were trying to, retake control of many areas. They used the rural footholds to advance onto cities, but then now you have the US trying to leave, or actually let's just say they've left, and Taliban comes. And so let's just stop here, because there's so much history to be lost. From what I've said so far, is there anything that you think is critical that needs to be talked about before we just talk about, what that really means as far as the implication of the vacuum the US is living and the rise of the Taliban as a war again?
I think you did. Actually, I'm very impressed. You did a really good job of explaining the historical events and some of the nuances, because it's not readily available for people and they don't understand. So I think that you did a really good job of covering all those different pieces. I don't think you really left anything out. I think it was pretty thorough. I'm pretty impressed.
Oh, thank you so much. Now, the US being in your country wasn't necessarily always a good thing. And I'm always very skeptical about good intentions that tend to stay very long. Because I still always just follow the money trail, follow the oil, how many trillions of dollars have been spent in Afghanistan? Where has the money gone to? So I'd just like to ask, from your perspective, what does it mean for Afghanistan right now for the Taliban to be coming back?
Sure. So I think you touched on a lot of really important things, and to even ask this question. And I think one thing that humans all over the world have a innocence about us, that we truly put our blind trust in our authority figures and assume that they're always going to do what's in the best interest of the people. And unfortunately, that is not true. Power corrupts people. The world has changed significantly. The world is global at this point. Commerce and revenue is everything. So when people go to war in countries, it's not to liberate people. It's not to help people. It is to feed the military-industrial complexes. So this 20-year war, and this is not a secret. It's just not something that's common conversation. Everybody knows this. This 20-year war in Afghanistan, or foreign occupation, or whatever you want to call it. It could be for a reduction of tax basis. Spending billions of dollars into a war, it reduces a country's tax basis. So this is a truth. Additionally, those monies that go into these types of wars, who does it feed? It feeds the Lockheed Martins and the Northrop Grummans and the military-industrial complex. Like I said, they are the ones that profit from this. And where are they based? They're based in America. So the money comes back to America. So I'm not saying this because I'm anti-American. I love America and I love the traditional American values. I don't agree with what leadership does at all times. So this is something that I don't agree with. But who am I? I'm not someone that has that kind of power, that kind of say. We also, right now, with what has gone on, everyone's blaming President Biden. And the way that he did the withdrawal, I don't agree with. That was one of the, lack of thinking. For God's sakes, someone in high school would have done a better job. But it's not entirely his fault.
No.
This is not something that should be on, where Biden carries that entire burden. This is a Trump issue. This is an Obama issue.
Bush,
this is
Obama. This is Reagan.
Bush Jr., Bush Senior, Reagan.
Yeah.
It goes up.
Yeah.
And this is, it's an issue. This has been, everybody is complicit in what has happened in Afghanistan. This is planned. This is known. So this is not a surprise. This is not a surprise. And it's not okay. And things need to change collectively in the world. So
yeah.
I have to answer the question.
Before I ask you the next question, like from your opinion, like Taliban's coming back, how did you feel about that, and what kind of emotions were evoked in you when you first got that news?
So we were watching the news, for probably since July, really closely, and I wrote a letter to a senator, and trying to get it to Congress and everything like that to put some attention and to bring help because the troops were starting to withdraw, and then the withdrawal started to happen. And so we were watching it, and it was just devastating to know that the Taliban is going to start taking over and to take control. It was unbelievable to everybody, to myself, to everybody in the community, that this is actually something that could happen, that we're going to hand over power to the Taliban, to a terrorist organization. It was probably the moment where they were taking different provinces, and it was just devastating. So we were just crying a lot. I mean, myself, everybody in the community. Then the Taliban put up their flag in Kabul. And when they raised their white flag in Kabul, Mo, I was born there, but I grew up in America, and I love my traditional values of being Afghan, but I'm very American. I cannot explain to you what happened inside of my body when I saw that flag. It felt as if my soul had died. And I was surprised at my own reaction. I didn't know that I could physically feel like that, that type of a pain. For 3 days, it felt like the organs in my body were shutting down, and I thought I was going to die with Afghanistan. It made me understand the plight of indigenous people even more than what I empathetically understood it as. When you were from a land, you were connected to that land. And I didn't truly understand, maybe theoretically, but to really feel that you are connected. That land is inside of you. You are inside of that land. The land has a soul, and you can't break away from it. And if you break away from it, it changes who you are as a person. So for a few days, I literally was just walking around like a zombie. And as an Afghan woman that was born in Afghanistan, I get a lot of my strength and my sense of identity from being Afghan. And not just because of what has happened in the last 20 years, because that's what the world knows. But Afghanistan historically is a place of strength. It is a place of tradition. It is a place of power. It's a place of compassion, a place of warriors, of people. We have never, as a country, have allowed any country to take over. We have won every single invasion that has ever happened in thousands of years, from Alexander the Great to Genghis Khan, to the British, to the Soviet Union, all of these different things. And so it gives me a sense of confidence. It gives me a sense of personal power that this is where I come from. These are my ancestors. And to see that flag go up, it was like my identity was shattered. Who am I now? just a few days after, I heard about Ahmed Massoud leading the resistance. And when I heard that, because of his father, who was the lion who took down the USSR, that gave me such hope. It was literally like life was breathed back into my body, into my soul. And it was like this vision came into me that like, he's going to lead Afghanistan to peace. Whatever that means, that is right. And that makes sense for Afghanistan and for their people. But he's going to be the one that's going to do it. So that gave me a lot of peace and hope. And after that, because I saw just within our community how hopeless everybody became. I was hopeless. Everybody became hopeless. And as a human being, the moment that you lose hope, there's no peace in life. It's the end. It's the end. So I just changed everything. I just have focused on being supportive of Ahmed Massoud and his efforts, and lifting people's spirits up in the community that there is hope. And I believe it. I believe it with every ounce of my being.
Thank you, Arzo, for that. Even as we were talking, I can just feel the pain, and this is a lot. And this is one of the reasons I brought you to the show, for people to realize that when we see those headline news on major TV stations about certain countries like Afghanistan, what you get to hear in the media, it's not always a true portrayal of what's going on. There are people whose lives have, drastically changed. Countries are countries, people are people who can't even afford to sleep, with their two eyes closed at night because they don't have that sense of security and safety. I mean, Arzo is, living here in the US. She's American as can be, but you can still feel the connection she feels in that country, and even trying to see what she can do to, educate the public and also help those that are stranded. So these are some of the things I want you guys to focus on when you think about countries. Don't always buy everything you hear on TV and all that. Now, we're going to talk about Ahmed Massoud soon, but I just wanted to, dive a little bit more into politics. And as a point of correction, the US has spent, I think, $2.26 trillion, not $22 trillion. So I think, so speaking of Congress, I feel like there needs to be an independent commission to show exactly where that, $2 trillion went and how the US taxpayers were robbed. And the US government has allegedly sunk a lot of resources to enable the people enjoy, what they call democratic dividends. I mean, even the last president, he fled with a lot of, money and left the country. And apparently one of a huge chunk of the money was earmarked to train Afghan forces to be able to, counterattack, Taliban groups. Now, with the Taliban taking over provinces, why does it seem like there's no iota of resistance at all? A sub-question to that would be, is it that the Afghan people prefer, the Taliban role to that of the democratic government? Because I imagine that the US being in Afghanistan, I don't think it's, like I said, they probably had some good intentions, but they might not have really, done a lot of good things in the eyes of the local. I've read reports about rapes by, these forces, or even looking the other way because the people doing the rapes were the people that they were trying to, have in power. And so I can imagine how that can even affect the psyche of the locals. They're like, we don't trust these Americans. So I'm just curious to know those two questions. First is, why do you think there was almost like no resistance until, before Ahmed Massoud came into the play? And does it really mean that you think some Afghans might even be supporting the Taliban after being under 20 years of, American rule?
So from what I understand, there's a couple of things. Prior to, or just as the American troops were leaving, the Taliban was talking to the Afghan soldiers and asking them to put their arms down and that there will be no conflict if they just comply. For about 6 months prior to this withdrawal, the funding to the Afghan army and the Afghan soldiers stopped. So these soldiers have been working for the last 6 months without any pay, no food. They're facing poverty. Their families are facing poverty. So when the Taliban came and basically, it's like the Americans are leaving, we're taking over. They've handed power to us. So don't fight. Everything's going to be great. Everything's going to be fine. So just don't fight with us. We're not going to fight with you. And I think because of that, that was a big reason why they put their weapons down. I think that from what I also see and I hear from on the ground, the Afghan civilians do not want to support a Taliban government. It's not a government that is, the Taliban is not comprised of predominantly Afghans. There's a mix of Pakistanis and Saudi Arabians and people from other countries, from other Islamic countries, with, like you said something earlier, a brand of Islam. There's a brand of Islam that they're portraying that is not the original or real Islam. So from the civilians, they are not supporting this new Taliban regime, and there is a civilian uprising which is happening across the board all over Afghanistan. So there's a lot of Afghans don't give up. So I know Biden gave his speech and saying that Afghans, they just gave up. Afghans do not give up. Real Afghans do not give up. And so there's civilians all over Afghanistan in different provinces that have picked up arms, and they are willing to fight to their last breath for Afghanistan.
Well, if you can look back at the history, like you said earlier on about how you've not allowed yourself to be invaded by, powerful forces like Alexander the Great and Genghis Khan, if that could be looked upon, I just, let's just drawing on hope from those historical events. My hope is that, the people of Afghanistan would, rise up and, counter against these terrorist groups, forming up. Now, let's talk a little bit, before we talk about the resistance cropping up, let's talk a little bit about U.S. influences. I feel like there's always this pattern the U.S. has when they try to exert their, influences on other countries as a way to serve as the middle ground, even though, I feel like sometimes there's nothing really middle about it. Now, just taking a little page out of the history book. So it was in Nicaragua, the Contra group in Nicaragua, which were the resistance group, they were supported by the CIA to fight against the Sandinista government. In Korea, they propped out Syngman Rhee, who did a lot of atrocities by killing people that they thought were communists, and he became the first president of the Republic of Korea, and that lasted until 1960. Why did the US, give support to the Mujahideen group? Because the Mujahideen right now, I think, has become that bastard child, which is now what we now call, the Taliban group. What's your view about foreign influences like those from the US bearing gifts that end up not being, gift in the sense of that word?
It's, I think that it's, at the time it was necessary for the entire world, not just for Afghanistan, but the world. At the time of the Soviet invasion, and you mentioned a few key things. Afghanistan is landlocked. Afghanistan is in a very interesting and strategic place in that part of the world. And so with the USSR taking over and taking power, they were a huge threat to the United States. And so the objective was to reduce that threat. And because of the invasion of Afghanistan, it was a perfect opportunity to create some kind of defense against the USSR. The way that Afghanistan is strategically located, the way that the terrain is, there's mountainous regions, mountainous areas. It's very difficult for trained military professionals to really understand the terrain and understand the land to be able to create strategic ways of targeting groups. So this is a benefit that Afghanistan has, and it's one of the main reasons why they've been successful in defeating any enemies. So what the United States ended up doing is put in a lot of money, artillery, into supporting the Mujahideen at the time to fight the USSR. And so much money was spent in that. USSR put so much money into that war to defend themselves, and they were ultimately unsuccessful. It collapsed their economy. It collapsed their entire economy. And the reason why that the USSR collapsed was because of this war in Afghanistan, and they never wanted to, continue that after. They finally pulled out their troops, I think, when Gorbachev came into power. So it was necessary, but here's the problem. And this is, again, I'm not, somebody that, anti-country or anything. Like I said, I'm an American patriot and I love America. But one of the huge problems is you can't go into countries and do this and then not have an exit plan or what's the follow-up. And this is a part of just the evolution of government and politics that is a problem, and that we need to figure out what is that evolution so that we don't continue these kinds of problems. You can't go into a country and throw this kind of money and put power into these groups and military support and weapons and then just abandon it and leave. So, there's power vacuums that happen at that time. And then, these different groups started to raise, and other influences like Pakistan and Saudi Arabia got involved in bringing their terrorist organizations in. And so here is this whole evolved version of what might have been the original Mujahideen. It turned into something different, which is the today's Taliban, which is even different than what that was in the 1996.
I mean, it's quite sad. I think you said it best. Even though they had good intentions and they probably were trying to help, not having an exit plan, it just makes everything you've done so far look very childish. Because now it's like, it seems like everything that has been done is almost like going down the drain. And because that was so swift between the US even announcing their plan to leave Afghanistan and the Taliban taking over, it was almost like a revolving door.
Absolutely.
You know? It gave me like a head spin. I was like, what the heck is going on? Like, I'm sure they've been doing it. And I think it also speaks a lot about the intelligence the US had on ground. How did you not know that was going to happen?
Of course they knew, you know? I mean, how can you not know that?
You know how this
American intelligence is not going to know that? Are you kidding me? They can target through drones at nighttime and night vision and target a terrorist and drop a bomb. You're telling me that they didn't know this? Of course not. I mean, of course they knew. It's just not part of the plan anymore, you know?
That's it. It's not being a priority, I guess. Now let's talk about Ahmed Massoud, not the lion on Panjshir, but his son. You've really talked about how you're supporting any resistance against the Taliban is where you're putting your money into. Now, from what I've read about him, his manifesto, and I've seen him, I've seen some interviews of him. So for those that don't know, his father was, he was a strategic war general, and he's the only son of his father, and he was trained in London. So he's not like just a nobody. He comes from a family of warriors. Now his hope is to spread power and resources. So we've talked about how Afghanistan is really, very tribal, and they have different provinces. I think about 34 of them, like, Arzo mentioned earlier. But Kabul has always been, apart from me being the largest, is also the capital city. So his hope is really to spread power and resources so that Kabul doesn't have that power it's had in the past, and then other parts of the country can have their voices represented. So he wants to decentralize the government. So every province, every ethnic group has an equal say in governance and voting power. Now, that's a very good plan. But what do you have to say to this opposing view? And this is by Tawad Hamidi on Facebook. I read his blog article on Medium, and he responded to me because I asked him a question about what he thought about Ahmad Massoud. And he said, Ahmad is a 32-year-old kid who has no military experience or any other experience. His father has decades of guerrilla experience and was a master war tactician, but very weak in strategy. Panjshir is not the same Panjshir of the 90s, and the Taliban are battle ready. In the pursuit of his father's legacy, he has the blood of thousands of Panjshiri in him. A wise leader knows when not to fight and safeguard his people. I think the deal offered to him was decent and workable, but him and people around him wanted 30% of the government. And Armullah declared himself as de facto Afghan president, challenging the new Taliban regime. I also believe he's being propped up by elements from outside at the detriment of innocent Afghans. For 3 years of war has caused significant bloodshed, and I don't want to see any more bloodshed, even if I don't like the Afghan regime in place. Lastly, I have been to Bajan. I love his people and he's very hospitable. And he goes on about talking about that. But I think the premise of his response is that he doesn't think Ahmad is well equipped. What he's really riding off right now is the coattails of his father. What are your thoughts about this?
So, yes, Ahmad Massoud is a young man. He's a young man. He's 32 years old. But he was trained by his father until he was 12. His father is an unbelievable man, and so he homeschooled him and trained him in guerrilla tactics and strategy. So he received that information until he was 12. I also want to just point out that an Afghan 12-year-old is very different than an American 12-year-old. These kids that grow up in Afghanistan, they become adults at like age 3. So it's a different type of person. He also, after his father's death, he became educated in international policy in London. He got his master's in war strategies. And he went to, I don't remember the name of the college, and I should know this.
King's College, yeah. He studied Taliban studies, yeah.
Yeah. So he's extremely knowledgeable. He's well equipped, and we don't have another hope. This is it for Afghanistan. So when I have conversations with people, I don't even debate this. There is no debate. What is happening with the Taliban in Afghanistan, this is not just let's just leave it alone and these people need peace. The Afghans, civilians, don't want the Taliban there. They're oppressing women. The oppression of the women is a humanitarian crisis. There's human rights violations going on. This is not just the Americans left and now the Taliban are here and it's just going to be peaceful. This group of Taliban, which also there's something else called ISIS-K now that's there that opposes the Taliban, and they have this other really strict view of what Islam is or whatever. These people are people that were brainwashed and grew up in madrasas. That's what everybody needs to understand. These people don't understand God. These people don't understand peace. These people don't, for any human on this earth that has any understanding of goodness, of anything that's good. Music is something that is a divine creation. Women are a divine creation. They're the closest thing to God that exists in human form. They're against women. They kill women. They are kidnapping women and forcing them to become child brides. This is not peace. They're already establishing that. If I'm coming in as a new government and I'm claiming we're going to create peace, the first order of business is to make everyone in the country to feel comfortable through my actions so that they know that peace is going to ensue. These people, from the moment that they have raised their flag, are beating women on the street, are killing women, are kidnapping women, are locking women up in basements of garages, are destroying musical instruments, are setting schools on fire. They are, not only are they not Muslims, not only are they not for peace, this is what evil is. This is what evil is. Evil is a disconnection from your essence as a human. Evil is the not understanding of humanity and human rights. That is what evil is. And unfortunately, like I said, these people have been trained and brainwashed in madrasas. Many of them have been molested through growing up. So unfortunately, these people need a lot of rehabilitation and therapy. I'm not one to promote the killing of anybody. We are in a time of war, and war times are different. It is what it is, unfortunately. If it was up to me, I'd have Ahmed Massoud capture all the Taliban and put them in a peace madrasa where they learn about peace and how to be a kind human and rehabilitate them.
Yeah, I mean, I think you said it. You said it in a very articulate manner about just when you go back to basic rights, and women have played such a pivotal role in Afghan, history, and it's so painful that this has not even become a worldwide movement. We've done protests for things less than this, which is why I feel like we need to focus on the people there. We just think of a country as a monolithic, thing, like, oh, this whole country is like that, and I think that makes us feel comfortable when we hear the bad things happening to them, right? But when you hear about women being killed or even girls being kidnapped and raped and forced into early marriages and being banned from schools or having freedom to do whatever they want to do and seek their own happiness, it's a fundamentally, human rights issue. And I don't know why this has not become a global movement.
It needs to be a global movement. This needs to be a global movement. It needs to be a global human rights movement. This is a women's right issue. We are in a very pivotal moment in human history right now, in human civilization's history. We have to determine, and I've said this on a local level within my community, but now I'm going to say this on a global level where it's not just about Afghans. As a human society, we have a choice right now to continue to close our eyes and live our comfortable lives. Because life is comfortable. Most of us live very comfortable lives. We have warm beds to sleep in. We can open our fridge and get a snack. We can go to the grocery store and pick up whatever we want. We can go to the fancy restaurant in Beverly Hills and have a beautiful steak dinner and send our kids to camp and attend a theater with our friends and drive our fancy cars. And who am I to tell anybody not to live that life? You've earned it. You deserve it. Why not? Or we can take this moment to do what's right for humanity. And right now, what is right for humanity is to stand with the women in Afghanistan, is to stand with the civilians in Afghanistan. What is right is to not turn our backs on what's going on around the world. There are things that are happening, not just in Afghanistan, there are things that are happening in Africa right now. There are child brides. That's normal. That's happening in different countries in Africa. We, as women, we need to come together. As women, we need to come together and to fight for these people because they don't have a voice. And those of us that have a voice, we have a duty and an obligation. And if you're going to live your life on this earth, there's nothing more important than fighting for human rights. We are lucky. We are the lucky ones. I am lucky that I get to live in America. I'm lucky that I get to call myself an American. So I have a duty to those that are being oppressed in other countries, especially my country, Afghanistan, which I will fight for.
I'm glad, people like you are doing that because God forbid we wait for the media to do that. And it's why I so want to draw from what you said about why we just take it back to the basic unit of measurement. These are people's lives, that are involved. You have women, you have men, you have children, and we're people, regardless of what country. We don't choose the country we're born into. These are just geographical lines that are cast, way before we're even born. We have nothing to choose about what country we're born into. And I think so taking it back to human rights and having people like pursue whatever, happiness means to them. But how can you do that if there are bombs going off your head, like, toppings on a pizza, for example? So it's why, I think what you're saying is so important. And I wanted to just highlight the importance of that. Now, so I know one of the things you're also doing is, so I know you have an initiative where you're, connecting refugees to resources. Can you tell us a little bit more about that, where people can find you if they need to, maybe help out or maybe make some
donations as well? Yeah, so as a result of this crisis, Mo knows me. I don't have time to do this. I have my job. I've got my life. I've got my business. I don't have time for this. But it doesn't matter if I don't have time. I have to make time for it. And people in our community are making time for it because if we're not making time, no one is going to make time for them. So we started an organization called Help the Afghans. It's a grassroots organization. The website is helptheafghans.org. And it has very quickly become the centralized hub for the incoming Afghan refugees. So we are working to provide emergency housing through Airbnb, through hotels, through different means, and set them up with jobs, set them up with resources so they can not just arrive and be struggling, but have a community of support behind them that will help them navigate America, life in America, to find a path of independence and success. This is the country of achieving the American dream, and it is possible. So in a sense, they're lucky that they came here too, because it is going to take a very long time to rebuild Afghanistan. So we want to be able to welcome them with open arms and teach them how to be American and be good Americans. So that is one part of it. The other part of it, there's a lot of unaccompanied youth that are arriving, orphans that are arriving straight from the orphanages. They've been rescued through secret ops rescue missions. So we are working with various organizations that typically receive these refugee youth and trying to get Afghan family placement. We very quickly were able to establish this database of thousands of Afghan families throughout the United States that want to take these youth. So we're very grateful to the community that has stepped up this way. But we need to make sure that we get these kids placed with Afghan families. If they're not placed with Afghan families, they get put into the foster care system. And I'm a longtime advocate of foster youth. The system is very broken. And if they get into that system, we're going to lose them. So I'm working night and day with lots of different people and lots of different groups to make sure that we help these kids stay with Afghan families.
All right, I'm going to put that link on there. And so guys, go check it out. They have, how you can donate, how you can even get involved, advocacy as well. And if you want to adopt a family or things like that, they have those ones. Now, what's your hope for Afghanistan? Like, I believe in the power of words. I believe that we create, our own universe. And, even as a Christian, I believe that my words have power. So if you could speak power, if you speak words into existence, knowing that they bear so much power, what would you like to speak into the existence of your country?
Thank you for allowing me to have that opportunity. I believe in my heart. I believe in my heart that this is a moment of darkness. And whenever there's a moment of darkness, light comes after. I believe this. I've seen it. And I believe that when we get through this moment of darkness for Afghanistan, which we will, through the power of the resistance, Ahmed Massoud, President Saleh, and the power of the women. Those women are protesting. Those women are getting out into the streets and fighting for their rights. And I believe that there is going to be peace in Afghanistan It might take a little bit of time, but I believe that we'll get there. I believe that there's going to be a period of abundance. Afghanistan has so much to offer. Afghanistan has, the largest reserves of lithium, gemstones, one of the largest diamonds that's at the Royal Palace in the UK came from Afghanistan. These are things that people don't know. Afghanistan has so much to give. She is waiting for the right leadership, and I think that that's going to come pretty soon. So I believe in that, and I believe in a future of peace, happiness, and abundance for the Afghan civilians. I pray for it.
Thank you for that. And then if you could have a parting, reflective words for the listeners, what would you like to say to those that are listening?
I want to say that as individuals, as humans, sometimes we think that we don't have power. We have a lot of power as an individual. Don't ever underestimate what you can do as one person, what you can do as a community. If you see injustices in the world, stand up for those injustices and do something. Get involved at a local community level. Do something for your country. Do something for youth, for vulnerable populations. Don't turn your back on them. We owe it to them. If we're the majority of the world is feeling oppression, and if we're here and we're okay, it's all of our duties to look after those that are vulnerable. It's in the Bible, it's in the Torah, it's in the Quran, and if you're a human of any essence, you already feel it and you already understand that.
Well, guys, you heard it. Beyond just talking about the country, those are words live by. Whatever you have, there's always someone that might need a little bit of it. It could be your time, it could be your resources. Give a little and, use your power for good. And there's no better time to be reminded of that than now. Thank you so much, Arzo. I joined my faith years, and I pray that, peace is restored soon. I know the last time a lot of people heard about Afghanistan was when the Afghan girl that made the cover of, was the Times magazine, Shabat Gula, the green eye with the red veil. And I hope that someday your country, flows with milk and honey. There's been a lot of loss of historic relics, bombed and, taken away. People have been displaced. And I pray that, there'll be that free flow of people, of goods, and it's going to be on travel places soon where people can feel free to, have Italian pasta, American jeans, Dutch bicycle, French perfumes. They can have their hippie trolley they wanted, leading from Europe to India, and just have, ways to pursue, life to the fullest. And so I want to say thank you. I know this has been a very rough time for you, and you're currently in the heat of it. It's not like something that's past tense. It's a present progressive for you. But I want to thank you for your time and for really teaching us a lot today. And please keep safe and take some time out for yourself. I know you're very sensitive. You feel a lot of stuff. It stays with you, but I hope you find ways to, take a deep breath and focus, because praying for you and for all of the Afghans as well.
Thank you so much, Mo. I appreciate this. Thank you for doing your part for humanity to give the Afghan people a voice. This was such a big deal. I'm in such gratitude on behalf of the Afghan people. Thank you so much.
Okay.
Thank you. And God
Thank you. All right, guys, check out the episode and don't forget to catch up another episode of the Sibyl podcast as well. I remain your host, Sibyl. Bye for now. All right, it's going to come out. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Sibyl podcast. Many thanks to everyone who helped in making this episode come out together nicely. First thanks goes to my dad, Mr. Femi Ogusanya, for providing some questions that really helped with this episode. And I also like to thank a gentleman on Facebook. His name is Mr. Tawab Hamidi. I had reached out to him after seeing one of his comments on an article by The Economist, and he was kind enough to provide some insights as to the questions I had asked. So many thanks to those individuals. Guys, check out the show notes, links to the resources that I used, including a link to Mr. Hamidi's article on Medium. And don't forget to check out Arzo's website, helptheafghans.org. I'll be putting that link in the show notes as well. I hope when all is said and done, we're all going to be able to say Zindabad Afghanistan. Long live Afghanistan. Bye for now.